Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvam anusandhadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Namah Shivaya. Good evening to everybody again. Sorry for changing the day of the week. For obvious reasons though, we'd have to skip a week if we didn't do it today. So we will do a little review to catch up, as always. And so far we have been doing this comparison of the jnani and the ajnani. Anybody remember what a jnani is or an ajnani is? Except for the people whose native language is Malayalam. Someone who is not a native speaker of Indian language. What is a jnani? Anybody remember from last week?
A person of knowledge.
What kind of knowledge?
Knowledge of self.
There we go, right. You're a jnani of biology, right? So, but in the spiritual context, we're all ajnanis. Now, someone tell me what an ajnani is. Well, if jnani means person of knowledge, then ignorant person, right? So we're all spiritually ignorant. And so we talked about the comparison between the two. And there was some comparison that came up last week. This week, there'll be even more comparison that comes up between the two. And where we left off last week was, while engaged in activity, when a jnani or an ajnani is engaged in activity, what is the difference between the two? A person who has spiritual wisdom, a knower of the self, and a person like us, who actually only has theoretical knowledge, but we don't have the direct experience of it. So, Krishna has hinted at it in verse 25 already a little bit, that the spiritually ignorant person is attached, and the jnani, or the knower of the self, is detached, or non-attached. This is a layperson's answer, very general answer. And Amma often says we should have detachment, right? We should be detached from all these things in the world. And then we say, okay, yes, detachment. But then when you go to try and practice it in the world, what is detachment? It's not so easy to put your finger on what detachment is. And when Krishna says it here, what does he mean exactly by detachment? So let's say someone like yourselves goes to Amma and says, Amma, what do you really mean by detachment? Assuming that Amma and Krishna are teaching us the same thing, which they are. Here, Krishna gives a little bit more advanced student, or a little bit more advanced answer for someone who has a more of a, wants to know more about this subject. In verses 27 and 28, Krishna gives more of a technical differentiation between the ignorant person's attitude and the knower of the self. So, but I need to give you just a couple more points of background so that we can understand the explanation that Krishna is going to give. So, has anybody heard of the text called Atma Bodha? Atma Bodha. There's a text called Atma Bodha. Okay, it's attributed to the great sage, very famous great sage. We always attribute everything to him. Shankaracharya, yeah. And some people say that it's, not genuine, but it doesn't really matter. The text itself says all the things that we need to know about this subject. So in verses, if you're curious to refer to it yourself, you can refer to verses 17 to 29. Because then there's where he explains that all living beings have basically two constituent elements. And one is the real, which is what? The Atma, right? The self. And then we have this thing that we call the non-self, or anatma. So if the self is real and everything, why do you have to have something like a non-self, or the anatma? Why would you have something other than the self, if the self is everything? Huh? Excuse me?
To find the self.
So why do you need a second thing, if the self is already everything?
Because you can't see it when you're like finding it through separation, by knowing what's not real.
Okay, so knowing what's not real, exactly. So, in other words, what is not real, what we think is real, is actually not real, according to Krishna. And if Amma really were to tell us the ultimate truth, she would say that. She often talks with us on our level a lot, so we get confused sometimes. But, yes, so the self is there, and then there's the non-self, or anatma, which means anything that is illusory and doesn't actually exist. For example, the mind. Amma says the mind is a lie. She said that many times. We'll get into that reason why you would call the mind a lie, but it doesn't really exist, actually. I know it sounds, but I know, I have this mind. How can you say it doesn't exist? We'll get there. So then there's also the indweller in the body, the shariri, and then there's the sharira, which is the body. So there's these two constituent elements to our existence, spirit, matter, for example, like that. So the three bodies, which are what? This is just, I'm trying to get you guys to remember all these things so that I can start using those without even explaining them. What are the three bodies that we have? Physical, yes. Subtle. And then third is? Causal, exactly. The three bodies and our 10 indriyas, they call them, the senses. Organs, you would say. So there's the physical senses of perception, and then there's the organs of action. So they call them the 10 indriyas. So all of these, everything is actually made up of the 5 elements. Now this explanation comes in another text called Tattva Bodha. But if everything is made up of these 5 elements, earth, air, fire, water, etc., that means that they're all inert in essence. Doesn't that sound crazy? How can you say that my body, my energy sheath, my mind, my intellect, everything is inert? That sounds like a contradiction, right? But this is what the Vedanta philosophy says, Advaita philosophy says. It's all inert, but it comes to life in the presence of something. The self, the Atma, the pure consciousness. So that pure consciousness is what enlivens these things that are actually inert. So the proof that the body is inert is what? Yeah, the body doesn't die, but the subtle body separates from the body, and then the body reverts to its original elements, yeah, it starts decomposing. The earth goes one way, the water goes another way, the air goes another way, and there's just mud left, right? So that as soon as the consciousness or the subtle body separates from that physical body, it reveals its true nature, which is that it's made up of the 5 elements, and so on. So all these things are made up of inert panchabhutas, they call them, the 5 elements, but in the presence of the self or the Atman or consciousness, they are enlivened and they seem as though they're alive. They seem as though they have some consciousness. It's an illusion. So actually, from Amma's perspective, all of us are like the supreme truth. She says, Prema Surubigalam, Atma Surubigalaya, Allavarkam Namaskaram, at the beginning of her talk every night. She says, you who are the embodiments of love and the supreme truth. So when she's saying that, for her it's a reality. For us it's just a bunch of words lined up. She sees the supreme truth shining through this form, but the supreme truth behind that shining through that form. That's all it is for a realized being. For us, we identify with the body. That's the difference. So for them, it's just a medium by which we interact with her. So Shankaracharya in the Atmabodha, he makes it clear by saying how this is actually taking place, by saying one should understand that the Atman or the self is always like the king, distinct from the body, senses, mind, and intellect, all of which constitute matter or prakriti. And the Atman is the witness of their functions. So it enlivens all of these things, but it doesn't do anything. In the verse 26 he says, Atmano Vikriya Nasti, which means that the self never does anything. So the Atman never does anything. Sounds like somebody you may know. That guy never does anything. Useless fellow, right? Yes. You might be thinking of somebody. But the thing is that's why this Advaita or Vedanta can be appealing to lazy people. Because it says that the self never does anything. I'm abiding in the self. I'm not going to do anything. It's a tempting philosophy for lazy people, for sure. The example that's given, though, is of the sun. The sun is constantly radiating. It's self-luminous. It sustains all of the life on the planet, right? Doesn't it?
But it consumes itself.
It consumes itself, yeah. It's always only an analogy. That's the difference. It's an analogy. There's no analogy, there's no genuine analogy for the Atman. It's impossible. But in many ways, the sun and the sunlight is the only thing that we can, it's only metaphor that we can use to understand, and space, right? So the sun illuminates everything on this planet, and everything on this planet is alive only because of the sunlight. But does the sun do anything, per se? It doesn't. This is the analogy that's given. And he says in verse 20, depending upon the Atma consciousness, the body, senses, mind, and intellect engage themselves in their respective activities, just as people work depending upon the light of the sun. Every analogy will have its limitations, but still we should remember that as an analogy goes, this is the closest thing you can come to understanding the Atman in our world. It's not doing anything, but it's only because the Atman is present that this body is active. So, with this background, let us move into verse 27 and see what he has to say about the contrast between the realized being and the non-realized Ajnani. Prakriti Kriyamanani Gune Karmani Sarvashaha Ahankara Vimudhatma Kartaham Iti Manyate. Okay. So, who has not read yet? Can you read? Okay, oh yeah, you go over there. She's so focused. Verse 27, the English. Page 108 or 109. The actual Sanskrit is on page 108, so good. Please. She's holding the mic for you.
Actions are in every case performed by the gunas of nature. He whose mind is deluded by the sense of I holds I am the doer.
Okay, so this hold means he, believes, in other words. So, this is us, exactly. We think that we are doing everything. So, if somebody comes to you and claims that they're realized, then you just say, okay, that's nice. And then after a little while, when they're not, really thinking so deeply, say, oh, hey, who did this? And they'll say, I did that. And you say, okay, we know this guy's not realized. And Amma never takes credit for anything. If you look at her, she will always say that the reporters will come up to her and they'll say, somebody said that you cured their disease. Is it true? Amma was always say, I didn't do anything. It's probably because the love in them awakened that cured their disease. She often responds in a way like that. It's very hard to get Amma to take credit for anything. And it's very hard to get us to not take credit for something. So, but what is the reality? This is what he explains here. This word guna actually means different things in different places. Here it means the qualities of nature. So it means, for example, sattva, rajas, tamas. Does everybody remember what these are, right? What's sattva? If you were to name a quality that goes with sattva, what would it be? Purity. And then what about a quality for rajas? Activity. And tamas?
Laziness.
Huh?
Laziness.
Yeah, laziness, darkness, inactivity, inertia, something like that. So these three gunas, or these three qualities, pervade all of nature, and all of us are a conglomeration of these in different proportions, and they come out in different times of day, in different strengths. But if we consider ourselves to be the body, then we naturally feel that we are the ones to do everything, because the gunas make up all these things, they make up the body. So if you identify with the gunas, then you're going to identify with the activity that takes place. The Atman, or the self, is considered to be gunatita, beyond all qualities. So we'll get to a good metaphor for that later. So now how does this happen? Because we're supposed to be the self, right? Amma says you are the self, and the self is beyond all qualities and beyond all actions. But at the same time, we think we're doing everything, right? We think we're the body. Why? How does that happen? That's the biggest problem that we have, actually, right? If we could figure that out, it would really help us. So fortunately, Amma says it also, but here Shankaracharya says it again in the Atma Bodha very clearly. He says it's due to association or identification, right, through close proximity. So the examples he gives are, the moon appears to be running when the clouds move in the sky. Likewise, to the non-discriminating person, which means us, unfortunately, the self appears to be active when it is observed through the functions of the sense organs. In other words, it looks like the self is doing all these things, but it's not. Fools, because they lack in their powers of discrimination, superimpose on the Atman, on the self, which is actually the absolute existence knowledge. They superimpose on it all the varied functions of the body and the senses, just as they attribute blue color and the like to the sky. The tremblings that belong to the waters are attributed through ignorance to the reflected moon dancing on its surface. Likewise, the agency of action, of enjoyment, and of other limitations are delusively understood as the nature of the self. It's a little bit difficult wording, but the point is, a very good example that we can use here is, let's say you take an iron ball and you put it in very hot fire. What happens to that iron ball if you keep it in there for a long time? Becomes hot, and what else?
Red hot.
Red hot. So the point is that through the proximity with the fire, the iron ball takes on the quality of heat and light, even though that's not its inherent nature. And the light, and the fire, which its nature is heat and light, even though it doesn't have a form, it looks as though the fire has a form, because the qualities are shining through the iron ball now. But you separate the two and iron ball goes back to being an iron ball. But fire will always have light and heat to it. So like that, the Atman is always conscious principle. It is always illuminating everything in the world. It is not inert. But you can make an inert thing look as though it were conscious. That's what's happening in our case. Just like you make the iron ball look as though it's bright and shining. And in the modern day, we can say it in a different way. Let's say you go to a movie and you're sitting in the front row. Maybe you guys don't go to movies. Different household, right? So when we were growing up, I remember my brother and I, it's funny, I remember we went to see a movie with our parents. I don't know why I'm remembering this movie. It was Benji Come Home. No, Lassie Come Home? Lassie Come Home. Lassie Come Home. And I just remembered that the bad guy was trying to steal the dog from the Lassie's parents, or maybe it was Benji, I don't know who it was. Anyhow, and he kicks the dog in the middle of the movie. And the dog started whimpering and howling. Oh. My brother and I cried so bad. They had to take us out of the movie theater. We were disturbing everybody. We were just like screaming that this mean man kicked the dog, I don't know how old we were, but that shows the identification, right? You're so identified with that movie. Even though we were sitting there, we were perfectly fine. We didn't have any problem. Nobody kicked us. It's the identification with what you're seeing on the screen that makes you sad, even though you have no problem in the world, right? So like that, Amma would say this whole world is like a screen, and there's this movie being projected on it. It's not real. It's constantly changing. There's no actually permanent existence to any of these things. And we identify with that, and then we suffer, even though our real nature is bliss. So when you get absorbed into that and identified with it, if you lose your sense of perspective, then we suffer. So the difference between the knower of the self and the ignorant person is that for the knower, when he says or she says I, it means the actionless Brahman, supreme truth. When we say I, it means, unfortunately, means the body. So anything happens to the body and we really get upset. So that's the difference. So when Amma says I, unless she's just playing along with our level of understanding, she's referring to the supreme truth. She's referring to the all-pervasive self. She's not referring to the body. And here he says, in every case, it is the gunas. It is these qualities of nature are doing the actions. So it's not as though when you do a good action, it's the Atman doing it, and then when you do a bad thing, it's just these lower energies on the earth. It's all actions. Everything is done by the gunas. The Atma, like we said earlier, doesn't do anything. And when he talks about this sense of I I want to see the word he uses in Sanskrit just to make sure. Ahankara, yeah, that's what I thought. He uses that word ahankara. Who's heard, other than people whose native language is not an Indian language, who's heard of that word ahankara before? Okay. How do we translate that in English?
Ego.
Right. Ahankara is ego. But you're studying psychology, right?
Yeah.
Now, how would this be different from... Because typically in English, we would say ego. Oh, he's got a big ego, or she's got a big ego, right? Is that what we're talking about here?
No.
No? What's the difference? What's the difference between the ego that Freud's talking about, or whatever the psychology talks about, and this ego?
Reflected self.
Reflected self, okay. But what does it mean to be ego to, if we want to say like, remove the ego in Vedanta, what do we mean by that? Yes?
To remove the interface with, the ego is the interface with the world.
Okay.
The ignorance.
The ignorance. But the ignorance manifests in the form of the ego, right? And then what is that? He's given the answer right here.
Identification.
Yeah, but he calls it something.
The attachments to
The sense of I, right? Isn't that what he says here? The translation?
I am the doer.
Yeah. I am the doer. Yeah. The sense of I is what he uses. Ahamkara. So that's what that means. He, instead of translating it as ego, we translate it here as the sense of I. Ahamkara. Just that feeling I. So when Amma says I, that means this I that pervades the whole universe. And it's you, it's everybody. But for us, I just means this body. That's all it means. So that is the ahankara. Because it's limited. It's not the Atman. So when we talk about, so even if somebody is humble in the common sense, they can still have ahamkara, right? He's a humble person, but from the Vedantic standpoint, he's still bound to the body. He still thinks he's the body. He's still ignorant spiritually. So that's a big difference. And renouncing the ego in the case of Vedanta doesn't mean just becoming humble. It means getting rid of that feeling, I am this body. That's what it means. So basically, a karma yogi is which? Does he have an ego? What do you think? Right. Because if he didn't have an ego, he would be what?
Jnani.
He'd be a jnani. He'd be realized. So that sense of ahamkara only goes away when you realize God. Because you replace that limited self with this infinite self. So until you reach that point, you always will have the ego in the Vedantic sense. So, yes?
Are there different gradations? Like, so for example, someone who's a Swami, their sense of I would be different than someone who goes out to bars and, movies and worldly. So it seems like you're saying it's like you're either or not. It's either black or white. I wonder if there's
I think the difference comes in the expansiveness of your mind. The mind expands, but the fact, that feeling that I exist as a separate entity from God or from the universe, that sense of duality is still there. You may have a very expansive mind, like through lots of karma yoga, through lots of suffering, through lots of service. You expand your mind so that you can feel other people suffering. And you have compassion, you have all these qualities that Amma wants us to cultivate. But when it comes down to it, if someone pricks you with a pin, you feel I'm suffering. And also you can feel it, you feel compassion, but you don't feel it as your own suffering. You don't feel, there's still duality is there. The duality doesn't go away. That's the problem. There's identification, there's compassion, all these qualities, but duality only goes when knowledge comes, self-knowledge comes. There's, I'm sure, very high level, different levels of samadhi. He talks about it actually in Viveka Chudamani. He talks about different levels of samadhi as though he's just eating peanuts. It's really interesting how Shankaracharya talks about it. But for all intents and purposes for us, my feeling is that until the experience of oneness comes, that duality remains, which means there's still this feeling of I as a separate existence from God. Okay.
But would you say that if you have compassion for somebody, you're acknowledging your sameness with them, like your oneness, because if you didn't, you would just be like, oh, that's their thing. But
Yeah.
if you acknowledge them, you're encompassing them as yourself and saying, I can feel what you're feeling, like I'm one with you around this. So
It's an expansion. It is an expansion for sure. It's just still, what is your experience of I? It is temporary that you're feeling something that they're feeling, and your mind is expanding for sure. But it's not actually the removal of duality. It's not the removal of the seed of ignorance. That seed of ignorance, as long as that remains, we'll still perceive ourselves as separate. We won't be able to, it's temporary also. It's just temporary, we're feeling like that. And the other thing is, if the person then does something to annoy us, there goes all our compassion, You said that to me, and now I'm not going to help you anymore, that's it. So that shows this so much for our non-duality. Yes?
How does this compare to when Amma says she keeps a provisional ego or egos to be able to interact with us?
That is the precondition. I'm just going to say a little more bluntly here. My experience is that Amma never had an ego. That's my belief. She just took birth here for the sake of other people. She never had any karma of her own. She never had any ego. She never actually, there wasn't a point where she realized God. I feel that she's always been the same. So I'm not going to try and force that on anybody. But if that is correct, that means that even to come here and to be in the body, she had to accept a provisional duality. That's the whole concept of, and Krishna is going to talk about it in chapter 4 at the beginning. It's the whole concept of that divine power manifesting itself voluntarily in a body. It's accepting the notion of duality. And Krishna says he creates himself through his own Maya. Whereas we are brought here helplessly by our karma via Maya. So it's like, I don't know how we can compare. There's nothing. It'd be like the cocoon. The silkworm spins a cocoon around itself. It transforms its form by its own will, like that. So we are a little different than that. Okay. So let's keep going. So all the problems that come up on the spiritual path and that prolong our sojourn of ignorance basically come from that feeling of I am the doer, which is called kartartvam. It's a tough one. Kartartvam. Try to say that 10 times fast. The feeling of doership. And that's why karma yoga is very important, because karma yoga helps us to get beyond that feeling of doership. You cannot through karma yoga completely renounce your ego. It's impossible because, like we said, renouncing of the ego means renouncing of all duality. For that, we need to understand who we truly are, right? So there's more a process of self-knowledge that has to take place. But we can gradually relinquish that feeling of doership. I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Instead feel Amma's working through me. It's only because of Amma or because of God that, I'm able to do all these things, etc. So, in the next verse, Krishna is going to talk a little bit more about the attitude of a jnani or a knower and his or her detachment to give us a better understanding. Tattvavid tu mahabaho gunakarma vibhagayoho guna guneshu vartanta iti matva na sajjate.
But he who knows the truth about the divisions of the gunas and their actions, O mighty-armed, knowing that it is the gunas which act upon the gunas, remains unattached.
Sounds kind of like double talk. The gunas acting on the gunas, so we have to sort of dissect this a little bit. But once we do that, we'll understand that this gets at some very key principles of the Bhagavad Gita and all of spirituality as well. So the knower of the self, or the jnani, does not have that ahamkara ego. And so someone like Amma, let's not talk in vague terms, let's just say Amma, she can go on and on hugging person after person. She gives darshan all day long, but what she's experiencing inside, we can imagine, would be the same thing that Krishna is talking about. There's nothing else possible because it follows precisely from his teaching. In my presence, all of these instruments, the body, the mind, she has a universal mind, right? She has an intellect because she's analyzing and saying things. All of these instruments are acting and doing things, and the body may get the results of hugging 5,000 people, right? She hugs so many people, she has like a bruise here on her face, right? And then she'll say, this arm, after doing that, it's, very stiff or something like that. So she will say all these things, but she will say, I'm neither the doer nor the enjoyer. She can witness all these states of the body as a separate thing from her. That's the part that we can't do. When the body suffers, basically we suffer. We may talk about it in a third person standpoint, but ultimately we feel it as though it were us. So Amma can honestly say, I am eternal, I'm not involved in any of this, I'm just witnessing all this happening. So that is real detachment. That is the detachment of a knower of the self. And that's the real absence of ego. And that's also why, I feel Amma can not take credit for things that we would normally take credit for. Even when she's on the podium and being awarded with something, which is the crowning moment for most people where their egos just go crazy. At that key moment she will say, this award doesn't even belong to me. You shouldn't be giving it to me. Like that, so.
Swamiji, I can attest to that. She didn't even want to accept the award, and only afterward, I remember at the Parliament of Religion, she thought, they're going to be upset. She turned around and had me go back and take a cab to go get the award so nobody would be offended.
She's not interested in these things.
She's not interested.
Right. So, now he says that he who knows the truth about the divisions of the gunas and their actions. What is the divisions of the gunas and their actions? There's 3 different gunas, right? Like we just said. He will go into a deep analysis of these gunas in chapter 14, which we will reach imminently, any moment now. So if you want to know those details, you can always read chapter 14, don't worry. It's interesting because he talks about the different types of food, the different types of offerings, many different things. He speaks about them from the standpoint of the gunas. So in the last verse, it meant like modifications of these gunas in nature, like the body and the mind, etc. Sometimes guna means good character, like virtues. And here it means the composition of Maya. So both sides of it. So he says the gunas are acting on the gunas. The first guna he's referring to means our side, which is body, mind, intellect. So the physical and subtle bodies put together are, he says, they're just a bunch of gunas. Just a bunch of qualities. Can you imagine if you could actually have that be your direct experience? That your body, your mind, your energy body also, the energy, the prana flowing through the body, and the intellect, all these things were just the play of these qualities, play of the gunas. And you were watching them, as a witness. This is what Krishna is saying, that this body is. Then, these gunas over here, right? They're, what's the word we use here on the translation? Interacting, does it say? The play of the... Act? The truth, the gunas act upon the gunas, yeah. So this guna, this conglomeration of gunas is acting on what? What does the second guna mean?
All the others.
Where are they? If they're not here, why do you have to have 2? One is here and the other one is? Right. So the world. Right? So the world is also a conglomeration of gunas. It's also just a big pile of gunas. And all these objects, which we call in Vedanta, we call them sense objects. Right? Indriyartha. So the objects of the senses. Those are also gunas. So that's why some people like to eat certain things, other people like to eat other things. I'm not going to turn your stomach with a description of the market I went to in Tokyo, where the Asian market, where they have all kinds of moving things there that just look like, you can't believe people were actually shopping for those things. And they're going to use them in their cooking. But the thing is, that's actually just my subjective judgment, right? These creepy crawly things, people want to eat them. But that means there's gunas. The gunas in this body, in this subtle body, are drawn towards other things, right? And those things are in another manifestation, but that's also just gunas. So from the standpoint of a knower of the truth, it's like, okay, one guy likes frogs, the other guy likes vegetarian food, who cares? It's all gunas anyhow. Were you raising your hand?
Yeah, so Amma often says that, if you stay attached to me or my ashrams, it takes you beyond all your attachments.
That's true.
Then I've also heard Amma say that for a true sadhak, like the whole world is the ashram.
That's true.
So
this ashram is for the sake of becoming a true sadhak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is the guru, is Amma, is the body of the gunas, and are her ashrams also the gunas? Like, how would we go beyond all attachments if the body of the guru is the
The
guna?
body of the guru is ultimately, of course, and you say, if you want to say ultimately, yes, it's gunas, but that's a whole other subject, actually, because we can talk about the guru. In fact, we were taught that the body of the guru is pure tejas, pure light. It's not like what we imagine this body to be. In fact, even if you look at it, the way it's described, the way that a divine being comes into this world, the body's made up, it comes into being in a different way. But ultimately, you touch it, feels the same, When she hugs you, it feels the same. So, We can say it's the 5 elements, but it has a totally different purpose on this planet. One person like us, we came with karma, she came without. That's a big enough difference. So we can talk about that more. Let us keep going here. So, yes. So in chapter 14, Krishna talks about how each of these gunas compels each person to pursue different things in the world. So the composition of our subtle body and physical body make us interested in different things in the world. So it's like you have the piece of your puzzle here fits that piece perfectly. And that's just your gunas here. You feel like you want something, pizza or whatever it is, or you feel like you want to go live in such and so place. That's the gunas in your mind interacting with the gunas in the world. So, and if you were to look, actually, if you've ever had your horoscope looked at, the planets are also considered to be associated with these gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And the horoscope actually represents even very clearly, even though Amma says it's not 100% accurate, no, Jyotish is not 100% accurate, but it shows how the planets can represent the play of the gunas in our life. What we're interested in, what we crave, what we dislike. So, anyhow, the jnani or the knower is totally detached because he or she does not identify with any of these gunas. So Amma is like completely free from the gunas if you look at it. She's happy everywhere. She's happy in India, she's happy in America. You know, she likes all people. She doesn't judge them based on where they're from or their skin color or their age or anything. So, she can also see how everything is nothing more than the senses moving amongst the sense objects. I told you what she said about punk rock music, or did I not? No? No? Okay, 1 second. I gotta get ready for this one. So we were in LA, of all places. And this guy comes up in the darshan line. I'm sure I told you about this. Anyhow, and one of the local people comes up to me and says, "Oh, you've got to tell Amma, this guy's name is Giza X," or I think that was his name, and he's the grandfather of punk rock. So you got to tell Amma he's like this big figure. And so I said, okay, gotta tell Amma. So I told Amma his name is Giza X, and he's like the guy who started, and then I couldn't think, how do I say punk rock in Malayalam? I just couldn't think of a word for it. And so I was like, punk rock, and I was like, well, what are you talking about? And then I looked at Asha, who happened to be there. You know Asha, right? And I said, what do you say from punk rock in Malayalam? And then she says, Amma, it's this music that gives you a headache. And Amma said, Chumaidi, which means you keep your mouth closed or something. You keep quiet. He said, you should never say that about any music. It's because you think that you feel like that. But all forms of music are divine. It's Saraswati. It's the goddess Saraswati. All forms of music are divine. Don't say negative things about any kind of music. And she was like, of course she was hugging the guy at the time. Maybe that had something to do with it also. But from her perspective, it's true, right? It's just the gunas, right? It's the gunas are playing on the gunas. You listen to classical violin, you think that is great, because your gunas in your mind are drawn to that. But other people listen to punk rock music, their gunas are drawn to that. You're still both ajnanis. It's basically, it's a question, are you awake or are you asleep? You're both asleep. He's seeing one dream, you're seeing another dream, and you're saying your dream is better than his dream. Neither one of them is real. Right?
It's a moot point.
And then it's a moot point, exactly. In the Tattva Bodha, Shankaracharya gives a very lengthy explanation about this whole creation, how it took place, how it came into being. So it's like a very technical explanation of a mirage, isn't it? This is how the mirage comes into being. Actually, before I came, I thought, let me just check on Wikipedia. I have my own little pet, interests. And I looked up Wikipedia has an explanation of how a mirage is formed, 6 pages long. This is for the layperson. But what is it explaining? It's just explaining an illusion. It's not that there's any real existence to a mirage. So like that, the creation is explained, it's not real, it's just, we have to give some explanation for how it came about. And like that, we explain our likes, and to Amma it's okay. Your dream is better than his dream, I understand, right? So there's another story that Amma told us once, and I'm getting behind, so I'll tell it very quickly, but it really helps to see how a jnani sees this world. There was a sadhu who was, told, he was looking for a realized master, so he went into the jungle, he was looking for this famous saint who was living in a cave. And he was hiking and he finally reaches that cave, and he sees there's this old man sitting there meditating with eyes closed. And he goes up near him and he's really shocked to see that he's been sitting still for so long that there were like maggots like in his legs, just feeding on the flesh. It's not a very appetizing subject, but this is to help you understand the degree to which this is the answer to Marla's question, what is real Advaita, what is real non-duality? So the maggot is eating his leg, right? And there's a bunch of them, right? And one of them falls off his leg. And he's in samadhi, he's meditating. And he comes out of samadhi, picks up the maggot, and he says, "Here, my son, keep eating." And he puts it back on his leg.
Sounds like Ramana Maharshi.
Yeah. And so then he sees this guy sitting there and he says, "Oh, welcome," And then this sadhu, seeker, says to him, "How can you do such a thing? I can't believe it." And he says, "Just anatma is feeding on anatma, that's all it is." The non-self is feeding on the non-self, and then he goes back in samadhi again. How's that for non-duality? Can we do that? Yeah? That is extreme non-duality, right? It's not saying that we're expected to do that tomorrow. We're going to have a retreat for that next week. See how many people sign up. So, but yeah, we'll bring them for you. You don't have to bring them. So
Hurts because of our attachment to
exactly, and everything about it that is distasteful to us is because we identify with the body. If it's doing that to some dead frog in the road, we just think it looks bad, but we don't feel anything about it, right? So this physical body, the subtle body, are made up of these gunas. It's totally natural for them to be active and to interact with these things in the world. That's what they're supposed to do, right? You can't stop it either. So that's why Amma says it's impossible to stop activity, right? The body is always going to be active. The mind and things are going to be drawn towards the objects of the world. The question is whether you identify with it or not. That's all. That's the difference. Yes?
I'm just trying to understand. So you're talking about, oh gosh, what am I trying to say? It hurts when things touch this physical body,
Right.
the senses, or when it hurts you, it physically hurts.
Okay.
And when something else is being affected, it doesn't physically hurt. So that means that there's some kind of difference.
Tadatmya bodham. We call it tadatmya bodham in Sanskrit. It means we have this identification with this body. But that is limited to here.
Yes, so that in its own right is a separation between us and other things, which
Exactly.
is where we get this whole I thing from. I can't wrap my mind around how it creates a separation, which means there's a separation, but you're teaching us that it's not separate. We're not really separate. So
I'm not teaching, Krishna's teaching. I'm the mailman, that's all.
All right, mailman, you're teaching us that it's not really separate, but that doesn't make sense. I'm just playing the devil's advocate
Sure,
here.
no, we're supposed
It
to.
doesn't make sense to me. Because
Okay.
that hurts. It physically hurts if a maggot were to be eating me.
The pain is the pain that belongs to the body. So, if we can imagine it's like in a dream. Let's say you feel the body's hurting in the dream, right? Because we have experienced pain in the dream sometimes. And that time, sometimes we're identified with the pain in the dream. Sometimes in the middle of the dream, we suddenly gain a higher level of awareness that it's a dream. Does that sound familiar? We've had these dreams where, fortunately, we all experience that, so we can have a metaphor for it. That you come out of that identification with the dream and then you realize, wait a second, this is just a dream. And then the pain, you see it like from a third person standpoint. You're not identified with it anymore. The pain is there, it belongs to the body, you're witnessing it now. It's not that the pain goes away, but it ceases to be yours. And the only proof for this that I have is dreams, because I still experience pain as my own. But Amma says that, when you come out of this dream in this level, we will experience it the same way as we experience it in a dream.
Does that quicken, like, how Amma say something like, this is not my problem, this is Amma's problem? So, like, say you were mentioning earlier, we start to awaken qualities of compassion, or we might feel the suffering of others. We might still start to feel what Eckhart Tolle would call the collective pain body or something like that. So if we start thinking, okay, this is not my pain body, this is Amma's pain body, then is that how we detach from identifying with the pain and can be just witnessing it without being affected?
Expanding the consciousness. I'm not quite, maybe you can ask me about it afterwards separately, because I don't want to get off the subject too much now. So, I want to finish at least one more verse before the end of the class today. And so, okay. Okay, yes. So the thing that I wanted to say here, in addition to this, is that it's the gunas acting on the gunas. And we say that we have two occurrences of that word guna here. The reason why we need those two is because we're identified with the body. That's the only reason why we need two gunas, right? Because it's all really one guna. So, and the example that has been given in a modern context is that when we're on the level of the earth, we look at the world, it looks all separate, but if you were to go up in a spaceship and look back at the earth, it's all one. So the higher your consciousness becomes, or the more detached you are from your own little existence, the more the reality of oneness becomes clear to us. And even in quantum physics, has anybody read that story about quarks, the explanation about quarks? How when you raise the energy level of quarks, they have spin 1, spin 2, and all this half spin, but all those qualities of the quarks disappear when the energy level reaches a higher state. So the higher the level of energy, the fewer differences there are in quarks, and quarks are like the constituent elements of everything, right? So it seems to corroborate what Krishna and Amma are saying, that everything is one, you just have to raise your consciousness or awareness to that level. Just skip a lot of things. Okay, so karma yogi, like we said, is an ajnani. He's ignorant spiritually. So in that sense, he's not superior to your average person, because your average person is also ignorant. The difference is that the karma yogi is using his actions to grow spiritually. That's the only difference, really. And we're trying to detach from our attachment to the actions and the outcome. So the way we do that, like we said before, is surrendering the actions to God and receiving the results as God's prasad. So the ultimate, which is seeing that I'm not doing anything at all, it's just the Atman is the witness and the gunas are doing everything, I'm just witnessing it. That is considered to be the goal, but for a karma yogi, it's not his experience. That's just, we have to accept that it's not going to be our experience right away. We can understand that is where we want to go. So we say that a karma yogi offers his or her actions to God. But what about Amma? Amma says, I offer my children to the Paramatman, or I offer my words to the Paramatman, or she says, I offer myself to the Paramatman, something like that. Is Amma really offering herself?
She is.
She's showing an example.
Yeah. we would have to say that actually she's not telling the truth. She's offering her actions to the Paramatman. Number one, for her there's no action, right? Because she's sitting there witnessing that the gunas are doing what they do with the other gunas. It's all just the play of the gunas. She's witnessing it. And number two, so there is no action that takes place. And who is she supposed to offer it to? If you're already one with the Supreme, who are you supposed to offer your actions to? Right? There's nothing other than you. So there's nothing to offer it to.
But she speaks to the public.
Yeah, that's what it is. So this is for Amma, this is Amma's form of detachment. Right? There's no action taking place. So for us, it's all about non-reaction. Right? We're trying not to react when the outcome from our actions come to us. For Amma, it's just no action, period. She can do all that she's doing in the hall, but she can also say without lying, I'm not doing anything. That's the amazing thing about her.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the gunas activate, the Atman activates the gunas.
Enlivens, yeah, just like the sun enlivens everything on earth. It's not a doing, it's just in the presence of the sun, all these things flourish, right? But the sun's not actually going there and making it flourish. It's the conscious principle. The sun is not, the Atman is the conscious principle. So it is what shines through everything on this planet. The subtle body just reflects it.
So the gunas already imply an identification because the gunas do perform action.
The gunas what?
Already imply an identification because the gunas do perform action.
Even if there's no identification with the body, like in Amma's case, the body is a bunch of gunas that's interacting with our body, which is a bunch of gunas. So the gunas are acting with the gunas, but the difference is these gunas are attached. Amma's gunas, there's no attachment. Still, it's gunas, but on one side you have a totally detached person who's liberated. On our side, you have a person who's identified with the body.
So the gunas in themselves there's no attachment or identification.
No, not in and of themselves. It's a question of that the person who is in that body. If it's a liberated soul, there's no attachment. With us, we're identified with it. All right, let's keep going. You can ask questions at the end if you have them. Make a note of them or something. I don't want to make the class take longer than it already is. So the ultimate goal of karma yoga, even though we talk about karma yoga as being detached, this and that, the ultimate goal is to be engaged in these actions all the time, but at the same time realizing that you're not doing anything. There's no action taking place at all. That would be the ultimate goal. So in that sense, the purpose of this Vedanta philosophy that Krishna is espousing is not to run away from action, right? This is the key thing that we have to say. He's not trying to run away from action. So like when we do our actions in the world, our activity, and we get disappointed and upset, the mind will say, why am I doing this? You know, I sang a song and somebody said you were off key or something. Why am I doing these things? I shouldn't, that's it, I'm done, you know. Or I cleaned the kitchen and someone said I didn't do it properly or something like that. So it's the practice of Vedanta is not to throw away the actions, but to learn how to transcend the idea that I'm doing an action. So that's what the purpose is. Let's go on. In the next verse, Lord Krishna concludes his explanation of the relationship between the knower and the ignorant person, jnani and ajnani. Verse 29. Prakrter guna sammodaha sammodaha sajjante guna karmasu tana kritsna Vido mandan kritsnavin na vichalayet. Okay. Can borrow. verse 29. Here, he's got it. He's got one. He's got one.
Sure. Those deluded by the gunas of nature are attached to the actions of the gunas. Let not him who knows the whole disturb the ignorant who know only the part.
Okay. So he's repeating something he said before, right? He already said that those who are deluded are attached to the actions, and he already said don't disturb the ignorant who know only the part. So what more can we say about this? Why is he repeating himself? We might ask, because he does repeat himself sometimes. And one thing we can imagine is that because an ignorant person is ignorant, one of our main problems, and it's including us, one of our main problems is that we don't have enough awareness of our ignorance, simply because we're ignorant. And the negative consequences of being spiritually ignorant. If we really knew how damaging and how problematic our ignorance was, it would be like a crisis for us, that we would have to get rid of this ignorance right now. But because we don't have that sense of urgency, that shows that we need to understand more about our ignorance. So he constantly refers to these things in all the scriptures, like Shankaracharya. They always talk about how urgent it is that we break free from our ignorance. So here again, the guna means the three gunas like sattva, rajas, tamas, in the form of the body, mind, senses. So we get deluded by those, and we think that we are doing the activities. So that's fine. What if you just say, I don't mind, I'm just going to feel like that, I don't have any problem with that. But the problem is that the more we identify with the gunas of the body, etc., the more we get immersed in the world. The more we get completely focused on the world. When you're immersed and focused on the world, what's the flip side of that? When you're remembering the world, you're forgetting God. You're forgetting the self. You're forgetting who you truly are. So you may find that when you're totally focused on the actions you're doing and what's going to happen, what's the outcome going to be, you're forgetting somebody very special in your life. Amma. So this is the price we pay for being totally focused on our doing something and what that outcome is going to be. We totally forget Amma at that time. So, but if you're a karma yogi, right, or if you're trying to practice karma yoga, for us it's much easier because we have Amma in our life, and that's a focal point that all we have to do is try to remember Amma. If we can remember Amma while we're doing our activities, even though you're not like a great scholar in scriptures, you may have never even read the Bhagavad Gita or anything, you can just say, I'm just going to remember Amma in everything I do. You're effectively getting very close to the spirit of karma yoga, because by remembering Amma, you're detached from your sense of doership, at least that much, and the attachment to the outcome. So, to some degree, without any spiritual knowledge, we can get close to the essence of karma yoga just by remembering a guru. Now, we have to remember also that the activity, even when it's selfless, it's also, when we have that sense of doership, it is also a kind of bondage, spiritual bondage, right? I don't know if that makes sense. When you do selfless activity, quote-unquote selfless, it means some pure, sattvic action. You make an offering, or you are doing some seva in the kitchen, but you have this feeling of, I'm doing this. It's creating, because you are the doer, so the results of your actions have to come back to you. So long as there's a sense of doership, the results come back to you. Amma says it's like writing the return address on the envelope. If you put the return address on it, then that letter, the response is going to come back to you. So if you remove that sense of doership, there's no return address. It just goes, there's nowhere for it to come back to. But most of the time we have that sense of doership. So when you're doing good actions, it's like a gold chain, binding yourself with a gold chain, sattvic. When it's rajasic actions, it's like a silver chain. and tamasic actions, it's like an iron chain. But no matter how you look at it, so long as you're identified with that as you being the doer, it's further bondage. It creates karmic bondage. So, a better way to do it is that even this act of offering my quote-unquote seva is just Amma's doing it through me. Amma's enlivening this body. It's the self working through this body. So, that's why at the end, in the 18th chapter, Krishna says, give up all dharmas. He doesn't say it at the beginning of the Gita, he says it at the end. So even actions that are considered to be pure in nature, even those, he says, give them up. Not literally, but give up the notion that you're doing these things. Give up the notion that you're, offering something in a sacred ceremony, or give up the notion that you're doing the seva. Everything you have to give up, otherwise it's going to be one more reason for you to be reborn on this planet. I'm going to keep going. Okay, let's move on to verse 30. With this verse, actually, he concludes that topic of working for the sake of the world, and which began in verse 20. Now, in the 30th verse, he's going to begin 6 verses of summarizing the essence of Karma Yoga. So verse 30. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasya dhyatma chetasa sanyasya dhyatma chetasa Sanyasyadhyatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatadjvaraha. Okay. Somebody please read.
Surrendering all actions to me by maintaining your consciousness in the self, freed from longing and the sense of mind, fight delivered from the fever of delusion.
Okay. So this verse is considered to be really the distilled essence of Karma Yoga. Sort of like a crystallized essence. And he states 5 points here. So if we can remember these 5 points, actually it's sort of like our Karma Yoga checklist that we can keep in mind always. So the first point is Adhyatma Chetasa, which is translated here as, what do they say here? It's the Jnaneshwara's translation or interpretation of the word Adhyatma Chetasa. He says, maintaining your consciousness in the self. Shankaracharya takes it as Viveka Buddhi, or your spiritual discernment. Either way, it sort of boils down to the same thing. It means you're focused on the self. If you have spiritual discernment, you're focused on spirituality, you give that priority over everything else in life. The fact that you all have come here on, at 8 o'clock to 9:30 on a Thursday night means you considered this to be more important than whatever else you could have done at home or elsewhere. So you used your discernment to value spirituality, right? So that shows an example of Adhyatma Chetasa. You're focused on the self. So this is considered to be the first criterion of Karma Yoga. We always remain aware of our goal in life, that spirituality is number one for us, everything else comes second. Material gains are like intermediary steps towards our spiritual growth. So, if we have that attitude while we're doing our actions, then even when we experience something that would be considered as a worldly failure, we can still consider it a spiritual success. So like, let's say you try to do something, but it doesn't work out. But let's say you're doing some karma yoga here in the ashram. Basically, you learned patience, you learned humility, and you got maturity in the process of doing it, even if the tangible outcome was not a quote-unquote success. So from the spiritual standpoint, everything we do in the name of karma yoga is a success. You just need that attitude that number one is your spiritual growth. Even your karma yoga, if the physical outcome is not what you expect, it's still okay, because you got this spiritual growth as you were working. And then he says, I have to keep looking back at the English. Fight delivered from the fever of delusion. So fight delivered from the fever of delusion means do your duty. That's what fight means here. Why? Why do we take it to mean do your duty in this case? Yes?
Because it's Arjuna's duty to fight in this particular...
Right, because he's a prince. He's the one that has to protect the innocent people in the country. You wouldn't say that to a farmer. If Arjuna was a farmer, he wouldn't be saying these things to him. He would say, go tend the field and grow food to feed the people who have to defend the rest of the country, for example. So he says, fight, but free from the fever of delusion. So Amma says that we should, start all of our actions with that awareness that no matter whether we succeed or fail, it's an offering to God. So that proper attitude removes the fever of delusion. The fever of delusion here is our anxiety, our attachment, the craving for success, the craving for having the outcome be a certain way. And Amma, you may have heard her in her satsang, she says, no matter what action you do, remember that the outcome is influenced by countless factors that are not in your control. Have you heard her say that before? There's so many factors that determine the outcome of any action you do. Most of them are not in your control. So remember that when you're about to do an action. That is an example of fighting or doing your duty free from the fever of delusion. So material success is always a byproduct for us, for spiritual people like us. Spiritual success is guaranteed so long as we have the right attitude. So that's the second stage. First stage is keeping your mind always focused on your spiritual growth. Second stage is having that attitude of doing your duty free from the expectation of the result. The third part is Mayi Karmani Sanyasya, which he translates here as surrendering all actions to me. So it's an offering. All of our actions are done as an offering, and for us it's easy to think of it as an offering to Amma. So when you're here doing something in the ashram, like we just had the meal service here, so if you're cooking or you're serving or you're washing the plates or cleaning the kitchen afterwards, we do it as an offering to Amma, right? And you can't actually offer like dishwashing to Amma. How do you offer washing dishes at her feet? You can't put a bunch of dirty dishes at her feet and then wash them there, right? So it's the only thing you can do is your attitude. I'm doing this as an offering to you, Amma. And Amma has said that it should be, when we make an offering, it should be like a servant doing it for the sake of the master. That level of, devotion. So that is what we can think of as Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, or that attitude, I'm offering everything to God. So, and the deity doesn't matter. Whatever deity you choose is fine. Amma is perfectly okay with every deity. And you go to different countries, there are all different types of deities. In Japan, we have trees and like foxes and all kinds of, badgers and things like that. Any of them are fine. Just that you consider that to be the supreme truth. But Shankaracharya says that no matter what form you choose as your beloved deity, you should remember that God is omniscient and knows everything that you're doing. So otherwise, when you're doing your quote-unquote seva, your service, and you work hard and you get tired, then you'll be like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, I know I don't get to spend any time with Amma. The people who do parking seva, it takes a lot of dedication because you're away from Amma for a long time, and you're thinking like, oh, after some time you must be thinking, what is the point? I don't get to be with Amma. So Amma helped me get over that, in the early couple of years that I was living in Amritapuri. I already had the nature of just kind of keeping a distance from Amma. I would never really go jockey for position around Amma. I would always sit at the back. And then every once in a while I would get a chance to be with her, but most of the time, if I was doing some seva, it was far away from Amma somewhere. And I was starting to get a little tired, I guess I could admit that. But always at the right time, something really interesting would happen. When I was getting tired of all this seva, I would go, to some group of brahmacharis, and then they would say, hey, Amma was talking about you. She was telling us that you work hard. This is not my ego, I'm just saying, she was doing it to relieve me of my, probably my short temper or my short patience. She was telling us that you work hard all the time, away from her, so that we should, do the same thing. But it was like, just when you need that ego boost, it's an ego boost, I recognize it. But I needed it at that time, so she said it. And she knows when we're feeling like that. It's the proof that she knows what's going on inside your heart. So when we do it as an offering to Amma, not me, but she's talking about, that's how we maintain that connection with Amma, by remembering her in our actions. So that's the third stage. The fourth is free from longing, free from expectations. So earlier it was free from the fever of delusion. Here it's specifically referring to the longing for the outcome of the actions. So the kind of things that Amma says to us, when you combine that with surrendering your actions at Amma's feet, the kind of thing that Amma says in her talks and her books, she'll say like, make a habit of telling your mind before you do something. When I do this, I'm going to offer it at your feet, Lord. And the result is going to come from you as your prasad, as your gift. So it will be perfect in accord with the laws of my karma. I will get whatever I deserve, whatever it may be. Therefore, O mind, you be ready to face any eventuality, even if it's the opposite of what you want. So let's say you're about to do something. It may be something really important. And you just make that what we would call a sankalpa, or resolve, before you do it. Just say that to yourself before you do it. It makes a big difference, because when the outcome comes, you already told yourself that you're doing it. You made a promise to yourself you're doing it for Amma. Then when the outcome comes, it's pretty hard to say, well, actually I wanted that, because you already promised yourself that you don't want it. So those sankalpas are very important when we want to make sure that we remember Amma afterwards. The last thing is free from the sense of mine. So whenever we claim the results as ours, we are reinforcing the wrong train of thought. We're trying to get away from that. We're trying to get away from the identification with this body and the action. So when we try to get the results, we've basically just said, actually, I am doing this. So we've rejected the notion that I'm not the doer. So if you're not the doer, you're also not the one that gets the outcome. So when the results come, the more detached we can be from that, the more we're reinforcing the notion that I'm not the one that's doing this, it's Amma or it's God. So one way that a commentator on the Gita has explained this is, imagine you're the farmer. So you go out and you've got some crop. We have a farm now here. So there's some crop there. The farmer harvests the crop when it's ready. But what did he do? He may have worked really hard in the field. But what did he actually do? the seed, he didn't make the seed, right? He didn't make the earth was already there. And the seed's ability to sprout and grow, he didn't do. That was already part of nature. He didn't bring the rain, he didn't bring the sunshine. What we do to make things happen in the world is really minuscule compared with what God has already done. All the laws that exist in nature, we didn't create them. Our role is just in harnessing and tapping into these laws. That's all we can do. The laws are already pre-existing. So what we do is such a minuscule portion of success in the outcome. So trying to claim that it's ours is the height of ignorance, actually. This is my crop of potatoes or my crop of tomatoes. When you say that, God will just be like, just don't make me laugh, What did you do? You just went in, you sprayed some chemicals on it, or you came and made, when there was no rain, you put a little water there, but even that water you had to take from somewhere else where I put it, right? So what did you do actually, So we really humor ourselves to think that we do things in the world. So if we can see that actually everything that we do, we're just tapping into something that was already put there by God, then the results are easier to accept as God's prasad. Once I'm always saying, even if you want to pour water in your mouth, you can hold the water and pour it like this, but who's to say whether the water is going to go down or up? If God's law of gravity didn't exist, then you would go like this and the water would go over there. So, you make your action, but then to make the water go in your mouth still has to be gravity. The absorbing the water into the body, there's a law of nature that God put there. Made it work. You're just doing a tiny thing. You're not actually making the rest of it happen. So whatever the outcome is, don't think of it really as your fate. Instead, think that this is God's blessing. This is what God's prasad, everything that comes. It's not I who am doing it. The results also come from God. So these 5 conditions, spiritual discernment, doing our duty, surrendering our actions to God without longing for the result, and without a sense of mine. These are the 5 preconditions for karma yoga. Spiritual discernment, doing our duty, surrendering the actions to God, not longing for the result, and without the sense of mine. So this is how he starts his concluding words on karma yoga. And next week we'll find out what we gain by practicing karma yoga. Because we like to hear about gains, right? We just said we're not interested in the result, but now we have to put a carrot in front of ourselves to study more. What's in it for me? So indulge that sort of materialistic mentality by giving an answer next week. We're really actually out of time, but if anybody has a burning question, yes.
This is from Skype.
Okay. She's confused. What do I do?
So the question from Skype is on verse 29. Somebody would like clarification or a further explanation on the second half of the meaning. Let not him who knows the whole disturb the ignorant who knows only the part.
Okay. So that whole, kritsnavit, means one who has complete knowledge. So complete knowledge means the knowledge of what Krishna said earlier, how the gunas are acting on the gunas. So we have very partial knowledge. We are already in the possession of the gunas. The gunas have actually, literally grabbed us. And if you study astrology, you know that the word graha for planet means that thing that grabs. So, and the planets are just like representing things in this world. They represent gunas, qualities. So these gunas are also grabbing us. They have us in their grip. And so because we're already possessed by them, our perception is totally biased and tinted. We don't see the whole picture. We're only seeing from the standpoint of someone who's already thoroughly in the grip of certain qualities, certain vasanas, certain gunas. So we have a very narrow perception, whereas Amma, for example, she has complete knowledge. In the sense, she can see it as a witness, third party, looking and seeing how this person has these gunas, therefore he or she wants to do that, is drawn towards that, and other people are repulsed by that because they have the opposite qualities, etc. And from Amma's standpoint, none of it is either good or bad. It's just a question of what you're drawn to, like the punk rock music example. So the person who hates punk rock or loves punk rock is a person of partial knowledge because they are already drawn to one thing or another. But a person who understands that it's just the gunas playing on each other, they have complete knowledge. So someone who has that complete knowledge, I think he says should not delude, but what he means in this case is would not. Because he's talking to Arjuna. He's saying if you think you're a knower, then you should not delude other people by running away from the battlefield. So, but if you were a knower, that wouldn't be an issue because you wouldn't run away. So he's saying you're not a knower, but even if you were, you wouldn't run away anyhow. That's basically what it means. Yes. Last question, and then we'll meditate.
I still don't quite understand the second part of this mantra in relation to what we were talking about either last week or the week before about how only people who are spiritually fit enough to understand the Bhagavad Gita could or would or should receive it. So, for example, I had an experience of like, okay, I went through the Bhagavad Gita class, or I think that I went through it. I don't have complete knowledge. I just have like minuscule scriptural knowledge, and then I was invited to work in a youth prison last spring, and I was there to work on trauma healing and yoga and restorative justice and racial justice. And the supervisor kept praising me for all kinds of stuff, and other supervisors would blame me for all kinds of stuff. And
Perfect.
Amma had already said, be attached to neither. If you go with the firm conviction that no one's going to say anything good about you, you'll never get disappointed. So this one supervisor who kept praising, I kept saying over and over, I'm not the doer, I'm not the doer. But it seemed like that would irritate this person. And
you said to him, you're not the doer?
Yeah.
Oh boy. These things are all for keeping inside your mind. The more you talk about them, the less meaning they have. They're not for telling other people. Philosophy is never meant for telling other people. It's meant for internalizing and making it your own. So it's better not to actually talk about it, unless we're already here for the sake of talking about it. But when you're on the job, it's not the time for philosophy.
So just pretend to receive whatever blame or praise is there.
Yeah, that's the test of whether you've really imbibed it or not. If you have really internalized it, you'll be able to practice it at that moment. It'll come to you at that moment, the reality of it. You won't have to say, I'm not the doer. You're inside, you'll say, I'm not the doer. It'll be like that. It won't be, you have to tell the person that. And people will see it, like we see it in Amma. She doesn't have to say, I'm not the doer. We can see that she's doing so much, but it's effortless for her. And that she's actually, it's like she's just like floating. She's not really doing anything. She doesn't have this laboriousness about her, when she's doing it. So her actions and her whole
she doesn't get tired.
The bhava around her, shows that she's not identified with it. So when we are no longer identified with it, our ambience will speak for itself. We won't have to actually say, I'm not the doer. Okay. And with those words, let us stop talking and start internalizing. And we'll close with the first two prayers and then meditate. And close with Purnamada. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Sure. So, if your schedule allows you to remain for some time, we can all meditate together. Keep your spine and neck straight. Close your eyes. Take a few long, deep breaths. And feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each and every deep inhalation and exhalation. Focus the mind even further by becoming more aware of your breathing process. Breathe with full awareness. Be fully conscious of each inhalation and exhalation from start to finish. When you focus your awareness on the breathing process in this way, the mind becomes more and more subtle, and you begin to feel the flow of the life force carried in and out of the body by the breath. Try to breathe with an awareness of the prana shakti being carried into the body with each inhalation. Feel that energy enlivening the body, circulating to each and every cell, rejuvenating and revitalizing the body. And as you exhale, feel the purification process as all of the negative and dark energy is purified and removed from the body with the exhalation. Now as you dive deeper and deeper within yourself, you witness that same purification process from a distance, watching the breath take place, watching the purification on the energetic level taking place. Allow the breathing process to continue, but witness it and the purification. Allow it to happen on its own and remain as a witness. The deeper you go within, the more peaceful and placid the mind becomes. As the thoughts dissolve, you feel an expansion of your consciousness and awareness. A deep peace wells up from within you. You feel and can savor the joy at the core of your being, welling up from the source. immerse yourself in that blissful state. Now let us conclude with a prayer to the Divine Mother for her great guidance and grace. Oh, beloved Divine Mother, oh Amma, please help this child of yours to remember your teachings at all times. When nothing disturbs my mind, I can remember you, and I'm peaceful, and all of my good qualities manifest themselves, Amma. But the situations are not in my control. When the challenges of life come to me, Amma, I so quickly forget you. My mind becomes so quickly disturbed. Please give me the strength to face these challenges. Help me remember you so I can be strong. Help strengthen my peace of mind. Strengthen my detachment. Strengthen my understanding and wisdom, so that I can become a source of strength for others, a source of peace for others, a source of succor for others. Please help me imbibe your teachings and practice them in my life. The only way I can do that, Amma, is if you help me and you're with me. Help me feel you by my side always. Let us conclude with the final prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath, and as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Vishwaya.